That just was not fun at all. A 9-point lead for Duke at halftime, but they lose to Kentucky by 5 in the Champions Classic. Brutal.
You are Locked On Blue Devils, your daily podcast on the Duke Blue Devils. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everybody, and welcome into a new edition of the Locked On Blue Devils podcast. My name is JJ Jackson. So excited to have you here with us on Wednesday, November 13th, 2024. Locked On Blue Devils, your one-stop shop where we discuss everything going on in the life of Duke athletics. And today we break down Duke's loss to Kentucky last night in the Champions Classic. A really tough contest to watch down their stretch for the Blue Devils, and our good friend Kevin Connelly from Durham is going to be here with us to talk about it and so much more. If you have not done so already, please be sure to follow and subscribe to Locked On Blue Devils for free, wherever it is that you get your podcast. Be sure to leave us a 5-star rating and written review. You can watch the show each and every day on YouTube as well. Please go ahead and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Like this video, share it with your friends, and so much more. We're on X at LO_Blue Devils, and I'm there as well at _JJ_Jackson_. So Duke falls 77-72 against the Kentucky Wildcats. It was a 9-point lead for the Blue Devils at the break, but Duke falls by 5. A ferocious comeback by Kentucky in the second half, and what turned to be just an absolutely brutal shooting performance for Duke, going 4 of 23 from three-point range, including 1 of 11 in the second half alone. Duke turned the basketball over just one time in the first half. It resulted in a 9-point lead. They turned the basketball over 6 times, including 2 by Cooper Flagg in Duke's last 2 offensive possessions, halting any chance that they had to win those basketball games. Early in the season, it's easy to overreact to a lot of things like this, so we'll try to be very measured and controlled as we discuss this game here on today's show. The aforementioned Kevin Connelly is back here with us, man, and thinking about what happened in the game against the Wildcats, first and foremost, I think a lot of people are going to look at those shooting numbers, myself included. Really difficult to win games like that when Kentucky is knocking down shots from the outside and Duke just can't buy a bucket.
Well, yeah, JJ, thanks for having me. Glad to kind of recap this game because, I had a lot of thoughts going into it, and I thought it was going to be difficult for Duke, even though they're very supremely talented, to match up with Kentucky because how they played offensively. And we talked a lot in the offseason about how good of a team Duke is defensively, but you look at Kentucky, and granted their first 2 games were against significant inferior opponents, but they let it fly from 3, and they were really good. And you saw that at the beginning of this game when you're like, all right, Duke is going to have some trouble. I think Kentucky made their first 5 3-point attempts, and on their 6th, I believe it was Cooper Flagg fouled the 3-point shooter on Kentucky that sent him to the free throw line. But Duke was able to withstand that. They withstand that. Their offense came out hot as well. They were matching Kentucky. They were staying in the game. And then you knew, as good of a shooting team Kentucky is, they were going to cool off. And they did, and Duke continued to value the basketball. Their defense tightened up, and their offense kept rolling, and they let it 9 at halftime. And then I don't know if you and your listeners had the same feelings that I did, but throughout the second half, especially early in the second half, it felt like Duke should be winning by a lot more than they were. And you just had the feeling that they were up by 15 points, and you look at the scoreboard, and it's anywhere between a 4 and a 6-point game. And that's kind of the first inclination I had of this isn't really good for Duke, because Kentucky, even though they have 10 new guys and none of them have played together, they have played college basketball before, and they're used to the games like this where it's high energy and physical, and you're going back and forth. And for the most part, Duke isn't. Duke had a lot of freshmen out there and a lot of young guys out there and guys who hadn't been in games like this before. And Kentucky wore them down. I think they wore them down physically. They certainly wore them down mentally. And that resulted in them able to come back and get the victory.
Yeah, 77-72 in favor of Kentucky. They're now 3-0 in the season. Duke is 2-1. Blue Devils back in action this weekend, taking on Wofford before more of those tough non-conference games are on the horizon for the Blue Devils. Arizona, Kansas, and Auburn coming up in the future for the Duke basketball team. Injuries also played a story in the second half of this one to Sion James and Khaman Maluach. We can discuss that in a little bit. But, Kevin, I think it's fair down the stretch. Everybody in the basketball world wants to know what exactly Cooper Flagg is going to be able to do for the Duke team. In the final 2 to 3 minutes, He had a tough and one finish. He had another one that bounced around the rim and finally fell in before he flexed in front of the Kentucky Wildcat team. And then on the final two offensive possessions, it resulted in, I think, Cooper Flagg just getting a little bit too ahead of himself and 2 turnovers there down the stretch. Everyone's going to talk about that, and I think it's important for us to discuss those late turnovers from Flagg as well.
Yeah, he got credited with 3 turnovers in the final 2 minutes, one coming with 1:41 left when Kentucky led 72-70, and then obviously the turnover with about 12 seconds left when it was tied 72, and then on that final offensive possession for Duke when they were down by 2. A couple of things about specifically those last 2 possessions. I get it when the game was tied and Duke has the basketball. And I think when the possession started after the timeout, there were about 26 seconds left and 19 on the shot clock. You knew who the ball was going to go to, right? You knew it was going to be in Cooper Flagg's hands, given the shooting struggles of everybody else. I'm a little surprised how quiet Tyrese Proctor was in the second half, because I think when you look at it, even in the box score, Tyrese Proctor was the second best player on Duke in this game. He's able to finish the night with 12 points, 4 of 9 shooting, 3 assists. He did not take a shot in the final, let me get this number right, 5 minutes and 41 seconds of this game. That was his last shot attempt of the game. Really, that was almost the last thing he did that involved the outcome of the game. He picked up a foul with about 4 minutes left. He was invisible coming down the stretch. I would have liked to see him some way involved in that play, but once Cooper Flagg got it right near half court, you knew it was going to be an isolation set, and he had scored on that same move a couple of times in the game where he backed his defender right to that right block and then put his back to the basket and then stepped through and then finished right in. And Otega Owe from Kentucky was the guy guarding Tyrese Proctor, and he kind of thought the same thing everybody else did, that Cooper Flagg's not going to give this ball up. And he kind of pinched in. Flagg lost his handle, and then with Owe there was no chance for him to get it back, and he stole it away, and obviously Kentucky goes down the other end and is able to score. And then you look at that possession after Kentucky scores, and it's a 2-point game. I think it was the same thing, Flagg getting a little bit ahead of himself. Dribble, the one thing coaches I feel like always tell players not to do is dribble into the corner. And that's exactly what Cooper Flagg did. The first thing he did, he got the basketball and just went dead set into the corner. And I'm guessing he was trying to back down the defender along the baseline, another move that he had showed a couple of times in this game and was successful on. He was the best player. He was the guy making shots. I thought it was a little bit of a hero ball type scenario in that last minute for Duke with Cooper Flagg. Would have liked to see other guys involved. But I guess you go down with your horses. Just would have liked to see John Scheyer draw something up a little bit more unique than just an isolation set for Cooper Flagg when everyone kind of expected it.
Yeah, Duke took 34 shots in the second half, and 12 of them came from Cooper Flagg. You mentioned Tyrese Proctor. He only had 2 shot attempts in the entire second half. Knippel finished with 14 points. 12 of them came in the first half of play. In that second half, 3 players played all 20 minutes down the stretch in the second half. Proctor, Flagg, and Knippel were on the floor for the entire time. We talked about the depth and how deep this rotation would be throughout this entire offseason. And in typical Duke fashion, 8 players saw the floor on this Duke basketball team. No Darren Harris, no Isaiah Evans, the 2 players who had played a little bit in those first 2 games of the season.
Yeah, and you think that kind of wore them down, right? Let's talk about Knippel. Missed his last 7 shots. It was a little bit of a rough start for him. I think he might have been overwhelmed by the moment and the magnitude of the game, but then went to the bench, came back, settled in, finished with 12 points in that first half. But as you mentioned, just 2 points in the second half, 1 of 8 from the floor, made his first shot of the half. And then that bucket about 17 minutes left in the second half was his last basket of the second half. So tough night for him. And maybe they could have used an Isaiah Evans or Darren Harris even in the first half just to spell some guys some minutes. And then obviously didn't help with a couple of injury concerns in the second half either.
All right, let's get into that. Let's get into some of these box score numbers and more after we take our first break here on this episode of Locked On Blue Devils. Duke falls to Kentucky 77-72. Locked On Blue Devils here today is brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. Game Time is the absolute best place to go when you're looking for tickets to see your favorite teams play live. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of different tickets. All-in pricing, where this feature is toggled up front, you're able to see that total up front with no surprise fees at checkout. You know exactly how much money you're going to be spending with Game Time. I love the seat views that you can have within the app itself. Get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy, so you've got exactly an idea of what you're walking into with those tickets. It's the lowest price guarantee, or Game Time is going to credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time Picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game Time, a proud sponsor of Locked On Blue Devils. All right, let's keep this thing rolling. We're talking Duke basketball. Tough loss last night against the Kentucky Wildcats. Kevin Connelly's here with us from Durham, and looking at this box score for this Duke basketball team in particular, 26-12, the final stat line for Cooper Flagg. 9 of 19 from the floor, 1 of 5 from three-point range, had 2 assists, blocked a couple of shots, was active on the defensive end of the floor, and kind of showed people why he's going to be one of the most talented players in the entire sport and likely bound to be the number 1 overall pick. It was good to see him kind of step up and live to the big moments, the big stage, and want the basketball in his hands. We already talked about the turnovers down the stretch, and I think it's good to kind of get him out of the way. It would have been awesome to have this perfect undefeated season for the Duke basketball team. But Kevin, maybe this is better in the long run for a player like Cooper Flagg, who I would imagine is very frustrated with those final couple of possessions, to go ahead and get that out of the way and know we can execute better the next time.
Yeah, it was kind of setting up to be his moment, right? On this national stage, the Champions Classic, where so many other freshmen were able to make big marks. You look at a guy like Jabari Parker and Paolo Banchero, Zion Williamson, RJ Barrett, just to talk about Duke players, not even mentioning like the Andrew Wiggins of type of other teams in this 4-team Champions Classic that happens every year. And it felt like that was going to be Flagg's moment, especially when the game was tied and John Scheyer calls his final timeout. And Duke is setting things up perhaps to take the lead with about 10 seconds to go. And it just didn't happen. And yes, I think he played a great game. He wasn't afraid of the lights. But the biggest talking point out of this game is going to be those final 2 turnovers in the last 30 seconds.
What was big for Cooper Flagg as well is that he was able to play the whole game pretty much. He plays 32 minutes and getting all 20 minutes of that second half. He was in foul trouble, and down the stretch, he did not play the last 6 minutes of the first half as Duke was feeling good about that 9-point lead, able to hold steady. But for Cooper Flagg to not have issues cramping like he had in those first 2 games of the season, that was a step in the right direction. However, that issue now was just kind of handed over to fellow freshman Khaman Maluach, who was dealing with some cramps himself late in the second half. And what a just dominating presence he was on the interior. There were moments late or throughout that second half, it would have been nice to kind of have him on the interior.
Yeah, I feel like he played a really strong game. You look at the box score, and I know a lot of people think plus minus is overrated, but he was a +4 in 23 minutes. And the start of the second half kind of tweaks that knee. It looks like it easily could have been a foul, and it's not called. He goes out, tries to shake it off, and then comes back. And you think it might be a little bit more of that knee injury. Maybe he just couldn't hold up on it, but it ended up being cramping. He had to go back to the locker room. I'm assuming he got an IV before he came out and came back on the floor. But at that point, Kentucky had already had all the momentum, and then they were able to drive him. I believe it was Andrew Carr, the Wake Forest transfer, getting an end one. I think that put Kentucky in front by a point or maybe 2 at that point in the game. And he couldn't get his rhythm back from being out so long. And you lose even more of your rhythm, not just when you're out of the game, but when you're not even on the bench and you're back in the locker room getting treatment. You kind of lose the feel for the game. And I thought he played a really strong game. You see 10.7 rebounds for your viewers listening on YouTube. I think this is a really good game for him to build on, but obviously somehow Duke has to get these cramp situations out of the way with their training staff. John Scheyer really irate with the training staff in his post-game press conference after the win over Army, saying it can't happen anymore with Cooper Flagg. It didn't, but it happened with Khaman Maluach, and that impacted the game just as much as if it happened with Cooper Flagg and sent him out of the game, because Maluach was kind of really controlling things on the inside against Amari Williams and Carr. And then once he came out, Malik Brown, who really didn't have a good game until he blocked that three-point attempt late, was forced in there, and Kentucky was kind of picking on him a little bit defensively.
Sion James also banged up for Duke, had a screen set on him while he was playing defense in a clear shoulder pain, had to be removed from the game and did not return. Sion James had a very athletic drive and dunk in the first half. He had another impressive drive and finish there in the second half. Was really poised in the big stage and in the big moment, because again, when you're playing at a school like Tulane, you're not used to these type environments, and Sion James seemed like he was fitting right in as an experienced older player on the Duke roster. We'll see what the extent of his injury is long-term moving forward, but that was just tough to see. An already kind of short Duke rotation got even shorter with Sion James exiting there in the second half.
Yeah, Sion looked like Zion in that first half with a dunk against Kentucky, going back to his outstanding performance against the Wildcats in the Champions Classic. Obviously, it doesn't matter at this point. I thought you could have called a moving screen on Amari Williams when he ended up injuring his shoulder, and you could tell he was in a lot of pain right away. Looked like he had some type of bandage on it when they showed him coming back to the bench, and he was ruled out right away, which you don't want to speculate, but it's not a good sign. I guess it was good because we got a lot of close-ups of him, that it wasn't dislocated. I think that's obviously positive. We could all see that it wasn't dislocated, that the shoulder was still in its socket. I think the biggest cause for concern right now is, did he separate it? And it is early November. There's still a lot of time for him to heal and recover. But as someone who's supposed to be a really big part of this team defensively and in the backcourt, it feels like he is going to miss time. Again, we don't know the extent of the injury right now. Probably won't know that for a couple of days, maybe even after Saturday when they play Wofford. But did not look good for Sion James. And it's a shame, because it feels like he's going to be a really big part of this team moving forward.
Disheartening loss for the Duke basketball team, again, falling by 5 points at the hands of Kentucky. Just looking at the box score with our viewers here on YouTube, far right side of the screen, you can see the Blue Devils go 4 of 23 from three-point range, 17%, which is never fun. And then even beyond that, what makes a loss like this sting even more, the game was tied for 5 minutes. Kentucky led the game for about 7 minutes. And then you see there at the bottom of the screen, 27 minutes and 40 seconds worth of this basketball game, the Duke Blue Devils had the lead. And yet we're the team, Kevin, talking about the loss at the end of it.
Yeah, JJ, I kind of want to bring this up, and I think it's clear in this game, and maybe your listeners think otherwise, and they could let us know in the comments. Mark Pope outcoached John Scheyer tremendously, especially in that second half. I mean, Kentucky outscores Duke 40-26. They cleaned up a lot of things defensively. They adjusted to what Duke wanted to do, and then obviously Scheyer not really drawing up any sophisticated plays late down the stretch. And I know we're focusing on this from a Duke perspective, but I just want to add this on Kentucky. Obviously, the roster would be different if John Calipari was still the head coach of the Kentucky Wildcats. Kentucky doesn't win this game if John Calipari is their head coach. I think what Mark Pope has done just in one offseason with Kentucky is phenomenal. I think the way he's gotten about 10 new guys who've never played together to play this well this early in the season. If you are a Kentucky fan and you're listening to this podcast to get a Duke perspective on how a couple of guys who cover Duke react to this game, I just want to tip my cap to Mark Pope. I think this Kentucky program is probably in its best spot it has been in a while, maybe since all the way back in 2015 when Kentucky was trying to go on an undefeated run to a national championship. I was really impressed with Mark Pope and how he coached this Kentucky team specifically in the second half.
Where does Duke go from here? That's the question. They've got a game coming up against Wofford and then more tough non-conference games as well still on the schedule for the Blue Devils before they even get into ACC play. Let's go ahead and we'll take our final break here on today's show. Locked On Blue Devils here today is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Go ahead and get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. We're back at it tomorrow night, Thursday night football in the NFL, an NFC East matchup between the Eagles and the Commanders. FanDuel right now has Philadelphia favored by 3. So when you get in the hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL and a proud sponsor of Locked On Blue Devils. Set to wrap up today's episode of Locked On Blue Devils. JJ Jackson, joined by Kevin Connelly. Duke falls against Kentucky in the Champions Classic. They had a 9-point lead at halftime, and they lose by 5 to pick up their first loss of the season. There are injuries that we'll need to get updates on in the days to come ahead of this next game against Wofford. In many ways, it's good to have an opponent like that on the schedule for Duke to kind of get back into a rhythm. But Kevin, talking about the three-point shooting in particular, I think that's going to be what's most exciting for this Duke team, is to be able to reset, get back out there, and start taking those looks, because so many of them were open looks in the game against Kentucky last night. And we know, and I would hope that Kentucky and Kentucky fans know, Duke is a much better shooting team than they displayed last night.
Yeah, Duke was shooting 41%, almost 42% from three-point range in their first 2 games of the season, and they got open looks. Cooper Flagg missing a couple. Tyrese Proctor felt like the only one that he was able to hit 3-point shots. Caleb Foster struggled.
Foster missed some wide open ones.
Yeah, I think sometimes there was 2 in a row, and maybe even a third one he got a chance at. Knippel was 1 for 8. And then Mason Gillis even tried his luck with a deep 3, and that didn't go either. So you wonder if they do struggle like this again from 3-point range. Does Jon Scheyer turn to players like Darren Harris or Isaiah Evans to try and give a spark offensively? But we'll see. I think this game certainly still proves that there are a lot of questions remaining with this Duke team. I think the injury one is a big one. We're assuming the knee of Khaman Maluach is fine, but obviously Sion James is a major question mark going forward. And they're going to have to find out quickly, because schedule does not get any easier from here after Saturday.
Yeah, they'll play on Saturday against Wofford, and then 6 days off until a Friday game against Arizona the following week. But that game will be out on the West Coast on the road for the Duke basketball team. Excited to see how they can respond shooting the ball. The defense, I thought, in many ways, was aggressive in creating turnovers for Kentucky. That's a big reason why Duke was able to have a bit of a comfortable lead there in the first half. Did not force as many turnovers, just 3 turnovers forced in the second half for that Duke defense. So kind of getting the defensive unit back into sorts and back in rhythm, especially if Duke's going to be shorthanded or without a couple of players and needing more reps for guys like Darren Harris and Isaiah Evans to make sure the defensive unit is all connected. I think that's going to be good and important to watch coming up on Saturday and over these next couple of days in practice. I'll tell you one thing, today in film study, I don't know that the Duke players are going to love being in that film room too much at all.
No, and again, we talk about the defense. They had a couple of breakdowns late, a couple of guys like Khaman Maluach and Cooper Flagg going, I thought, for unnecessary blocks close to the rim, leaving their man, and then giving Kentucky a wide open layup. But when you talk about this schedule going forward, I think even prior to the Kentucky game, you wanted to split them. You wanted to go 2-2 in the 4 games against Kentucky, Arizona, Kansas, and Auburn. And I think probably the 2 most likely games you thought you were going to win were Kentucky and Auburn, specifically Auburn, because that one's on your home court. Now, in order to go 2-2, you need to go 2-1 in the next 3 games against those big opponents. And it's not going to be easy, because you're playing a true road game against Arizona next Friday, and then the following Tuesday, a neutral site game against Kansas, who's number 1 in the country and has a great player like DeJuan Harris and KJ Adams and Hunter Dickinson, and they're number 1 in the country for a reason. So I still think the goal has to be 2-2, maybe a little bit different how you get to 2-2, but it's certainly going to be interesting to see how this team responds and adjusts following this loss.
I fully believe this team will respond. I'm still just as optimistic about what this team is able to do. Our friends at FanDuel still view the Duke Blue Devils as one of the absolute favorites to win that national championship. That hasn't changed much at all. Getting healthy is going to be so important. Letting Cooper Flagg and Connelly offensively lead the way for this Duke basketball team is going to be the key to success the rest of the way for the Duke season. Kevin, always love chopping it up and breaking down wins and losses with you. Hopefully we've got more wins throughout the rest of the season. Tell the good people out there about Ball Durham and what you've got going on in your world.
Yeah, we're all over everything over at balldurham.com. You can follow us on social media at ball_Durham. We're all on top of this game, obviously, going forward. Anything Duke basketball you want, we got it over at Ball Durham. So, again, that address is balldurham.com, where you can come read us every day.
We'll do this again soon, Kevin, okay?
All right, JJ, thanks.
All right, that's Kevin Connelly joining us here on today's episode of Locked On Blue Devils, and that brings us to a close. Thanks so much for your support of Locked On Blue Devils. Let's get Duke back in the win column coming up on Saturday against Wofford. If you haven't done so already, please be sure to follow and subscribe to Locked On Blue Devils for free, wherever it is that you get your podcasts. Leave us a 5-star rating and written review, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. As always, go Duke. I'll talk to you tomorrow. My name is JJ Jackson. Thank you, and good day.